We're talking today with Father Peter Vu of Kentwood, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Peter, start us off with a little bit of background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born, my name is Father Peter Vu. I've been a priest for the Diocese of Grand Rapids for 25 years and was a chaplain at Home of Veterans for about 11 years or so.
Okay.
I was born in Saigon, Vietnam. Now obviously it's Ho Chi Minh City.
Okay. And what year were you born?
I was born 1970.
Okay. Now at that time, what was your father doing?
My father was he worked for the South Vietnam, and certainly worked with the Americans during the Vietnam War. And he himself worked in the intelligence, national security. He didn't tell me all the details, but that's all classified, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. And so was he a civilian officially?
Yeah, so I think some memories that Dad shared with me about, he would, work as a taxi cab driver.
Yeah. Well, I meant actually, was he, because some intelligence personnel are in the military,
yeah,
and some work for the government, but do not wear a uniform.
Yep. So he did not wear any uniform.
Okay.
So he mostly in civilian clothes, and I guess being a taxi cab driver gave him being able to watch some of the.
Oh, okay. So he was working as a taxi cab driver part-time, and so essentially he's gathering intelligence.
Exactly. I think that's
Okay.
what what I picked up when he shared some of that memories.
Okay. So he wasn't a really high-ranking person.
He himself had some access to the office, but I don't know. I did not know how much that he did work in the office itself.
Okay.
But he did, go gather some information.
Okay. All right. And what kind of neighborhood did you live in? Was it richer or poorer than others, or?
The location that we bought the house, or at least my dad did, was close to the airport, Tanzania Airport. So it was mostly city. So I grew up in a middle class type of neighborhood.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you were doing reasonably well, and you were not poor peasants in the countryside and that kind of thing.
Yeah, just did not know what the country would be like, but I have some relatives that live there. And later on, I did try to explore to see what country feels like.
Okay. All right. Now you were a Catholic priest today, so was your family Catholic?
Yes, at some point, my family became Catholic. I did not know how far back, but most of my friends and some of my family members are Buddhists as well. So at some point, they converted to maybe when the French was over there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the French, the French missionaries were there for a long time. They ran the country from the later 19th century until '54. But now, did your family migrate to the south from the north?
Yes.
Okay.
I remember that mom and dad and the whole family said that was their first time running away from the communists. Obviously, when the French was defeated by the communists, and that's when my family migrated to the south.
Right.
So that was the first time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So early on now, and then of course we get down to, you're only born in 1970, so you're not going to remember too much of what life was like, certainly while the Americans were around. The Americans are mostly out by '73. There are still some American officials in the embassy there and so forth. But then you get the fall of Saigon in 1975. And so you have, the things are falling apart, and then the communists arrive. So can you tell us what life was like, or what you remember about the period right before the communists came in, and then what happens after that?
I guess as a child, my parents did not want me to know about the war. So I think partly that. Um, all the televisions and shows and all that, as you know, it was also being, monitored closely by the government. So I guess I live in a blissful life of not knowing the war is going on around me. But I guess there was some incident reported on the news that perked my interest. And this is before the collapse of Saigon in '75. That I remember as a kid, and I've seen demonstrations and curfews, and one incident I remember was some of these one of the infiltrator from the north stole a U.S. Army truck and then blasted through some compounds or government offices and start shooting. And of course, he was shot. And so the pictures of him and the whole chaos, show up on the news. And I just like, wow, I didn't know that happened. So that I remember that was one of the things that told me about there's a war going on. I also have family members who was chaplains, a couple of my uncles in Da Nang and Cam Ranh Bay. And so they came home to visit. So they were chaplain over there, but they come home to visit, and they share stories about, how they were chaplain and American GI and certainly the South Vietnamese. So I listening in, but like most kids, I was more busy with friends and other things. So I did not pay attention a lot about the details, the progress of the war, or some of the stories of how the fight happened.
Right.
But toward the end, I remember when the collapse of Saigon came about, and that's when I guess all hell broke loose, because I remember even the week before that, my dad knew that there was the South will be, I guess the American withdrew, and so a lot of Vietnamese already planned to, if you the pilots, you would get your family on the Huey helicopter and fly out, and you see those pictures on the ship after they flew there, and they just threw away or pushed aside that. So some of my family members did go through that. Now, my dad was one of those that thought that he might join with other South Vietnamese to create insurgency and make the war, I guess, keep the country.
Yeah.
And so I remember he said, well, we'll continue to fight and whatnot. And in my mind, I knew that, my parents my mom at least want to leave. So I remember we went to Vũng Tàu, and from there, hopefully, we can fly to one of the American carriers. But for some reason, I remember we went, and then we turned around. And of course, the last few days of Saigon was all hell broke loose. And I remember it's almost like the scene in the book of Revelations, everything just fell out from the sky. My house was close to Tanzania Airport, which is the last place that the communists wanted to, I guess, to conquer, beside the presidential palace, which is not too far from my house either. I never seen anything like that before. Obviously, there was a lot of shootings, shouting. I know the sky was filled with chaos, helicopters and bullets flying, all that. And of course, my house was close to the airport, so it was bombed constantly, but obviously we did not. We lost electricity, water, all that. Whatever food that we had, we use it. Whether chickens that we raised or rabbits, or plants that we grew around the house. That's our source of food. Over there, I guess we have some canned food, but not like here that you can and you store for months. I guess we didn't plan for that.
Right.
And so I remember, trying to hunker down for close to a week, maybe even more, and try to survive through that. And then we try to get, basically, my house, like most tropical homes, we didn't have basement. We did not have tornado to worry about.
Yeah.
So the only thing we had to worry about, like most American GI would say, rain and more rain, monsoon. So we ourselves have enough water. There's basins and well, for that. But I remember we tried to create a makeshift bunker. We have a few pieces of wood flat, about 3 or 4 inches, that I think my family planned to prepare for my grandparents' casket. And we sort of create a little shelter, and everybody just went in there, and it was so hot. And I remember we had to go out to get some air and whatnot, but then, like you see in the war in Ukraine and other war, you go outside, you take a chance, and you might get shot, bullets fly through. And so that was, I guess time seemed to stand still for me during those days. Of course, as a kid, we didn't have, we loved to stay home, don't have school. But surviving through war, through those days, was traumatic, to say the least.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, did you have any brothers or sisters?
I had 2 younger sisters, and I remember that was my youngest one was born. Younger sister was born on 1975. I think only a few months old. And I remember when we tried to go to the American carrier, and my parents had to prepare milk and baby formula and all that, and it was so dramatic for me as a kid. I said, gee, this kid's gonna, make the trip really long for us. So I have 2 younger sisters that.
And when you went to Vung Tau, did you drive or?
Yes. My dad he owned a couple taxi cabs.
Okay, so he had
Yep.
cabs, yeah.
And I didn't know if he had enough gas, but I know that we packed into that vehicle, and we drove there, and we thought that, well, we just dispose the cab and either get through a little taxi boat or helicopter of some kind, and then get evacuated. But either the helicopter didn't come or whatever, or my dad changed his mind. We turned around, I said, man, we're gonna get killed. I remember as a kid, because bullets and everything, and then of course we had to go through so many checkpoints. And that we had to maneuver in the sandbags and whatnot. And we made it out of Saigon, but then turning around, I said, geez, here we go again. I guess it's meant to be that I need to stay in Vietnam to see the aftermath of the war.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when the communists finally come in, do you remember the first time did you see their soldiers when they came in, or?
It's funny. As a kid, I remember one of the, I guess you're afraid of the unknown. And I remember before the communists even came, somehow I heard through my family and neighbors and all that, they said, yep, these people will come in, and if the ladies have nice nail, they're gonna take the plier, they're gonna pull the nail out. I thought, oh God. So that was one of the propaganda that I heard. And then of course, you know, they will see what you have, and if you have a lot of possessions, you are capitalist, and you would, I guess, suffer according to their the consequences that they have. So I guess, just the, you know, pictures of how the communists, you know, their soldier, you know, war, that funny head that I think you see on TV, you know, and then that's about it. But as far as, you know, seeing anyone before that, we didn't have any concept. Right. So that whole thing alone scared a lot of people. And then, of course, you know, when they took over Saigon, yeah, the first time I remember we saw the tank went through, because my home, like, you know, is the high rise. So we could see from our vantage point through tree lines and neighborhood. We saw tanks went through, and then of course they start to set up checkpoints, and then we start seeing the first time seeing a communist, myself as a kid. So, and you know, the person, you know, carried the AK-47. He looks like me. You know, we didn't talk. I didn't dare to engage in any conversation, and just saw him from afar. And that was the first time. But as far as having the freedom of get back to normal, it took at least a week after they took over the airport and other places in the South.
So there was about a week more without power or water or things like that.
Yeah, it seems like I shared, I mean, it seems like time stood still, and we couldn't tell what day that was and what not. I remember, you know, just the matter of survival, and you know, we cooked inside before, but during those couple of weeks at least, we had to cook outside because there's no electricity and whatnot. And I remember we ran out of woods and also coal and all that, kerosene, and we had to use any paper we had. Cooking with papers and cooking with straw, I've learned a lot from that. A lot of smokestack, you know, coming out. And so we had to use currency, and that was one of the things that struck me as a little kid. I was just like, why are we burning our money? And is there a sin to, you know, to keep the money? And I didn't know. My family was quite religious, so we pray and we, you know, a lot. And I didn't know maybe it's a sin to keep a lot of money, and so maybe we need to burn the money now. But after a few weeks, I mean a few days, I start to pick up that, you know, it's because of survival. We have to use the money. Either we keep the money and we die, and without food. So I remember, as someone, I guess as a boy and a young, I was only 5 years old, but I had to take charge of some of the heavy duties like that, going outside and do that instead of my mom or my grandmother and my sister. And I tried to feed the fire for cooking. And I remember I tried to feed the one with the lowest denomination. I said, maybe I need to keep the 100 because, you know, who knows, you know, maybe things change and I need that $100. But I remember I didn't have any choice. And then after feeding the lowest denomination, and I had to burn the one with the highest. As a kid, I said, it's really dramatic. It changed my life, how I look at possessions and how I look at survival and what comes first.
Sure.
Yeah.
Of course, the money may not have been worth anything anyway. If it was South Vietnamese money or American scrip or something like that, then it would not, it might as well burn it at that point. It had more value that way.
Yeah, and they did change a lot of talk about. It's funny we're talking about inflation, and over there was that whole deflation thing. I remember one of the clear memories I had about the communist was we tried to exchange our currency, and it was so bad that I think at first we able to exchange $100 old currency for I think 10 or $1. They call it dong. And later on, it was so bad I think we had to trade it like 1,000 for one. I said, gee, I remember thinking to myself, I didn't know if I talked to my family that at this rate we don't have the money left to exchange. So.
Right. Okay. Now, where was your father during all of this?
Well, he himself, I remember, was still trying to figure out what to do with the country. So the country was so important to him. And the second thing is about, I guess, what's the next move for him? Because the communist is here, so his enemies are here. So are they going to arrest him, shoot him, kill him? But I knew that he himself was a little more seclusive, I guess. I didn't see him talk with the family a lot more. I guess he was in contact with other friends, South Vietnamese soldiers and government to figure out that, and certainly try to see what they could do to protect the family. Meanwhile, I'm the one that tried to carry on the day-to-day things, like that. Yep.
So he was basically staying out of sight mostly, and so you were the one that people would see, or the women, and not him.
Yep.
Okay. Now, how long did he stay with you?
I knew he was in and out, during that time. My memories of him was, he was not like the head of the household like he used to. Wherever we went before that, we went with him. At this point, he, maybe I saw him at meals and whatnot, but then, other than that, I didn't see much of him. Maybe, like I said, partly because, he tried to figure out what's the next move. But also, too, I think in terms of protection, I know, like any war, the man, young man, old man would be the first one that would be routed up. And I saw a lot of dead bodies, obviously, a lot of young men and former soldiers being killed all over the streets, and blood and all that. So I think it was a scary scene. But as a kid, I remember I was trying to help bring food, try to be helpful, be in charge when that missing link is there, and I have uncles too, but those chaplains, they were stuck in Da Nang and Cam Ranh, couldn't go. So they came in, they said, I remember one of the orders was that stay where you are. There's no movement. I guess they try to freeze everything so that they can have control easier, because there's a lot more movement. I mean, it will be hard for them to take control of the place. So curfew was a phenomenon, during that time, and of course there was, first few days there was no communication from the communists, but then slowly we began to hear some of the communication through loudspeaker, which was like, geez, I lived there for 5 years as a kid. We never heard the loudspeaker before, and this is, like in the middle of Saigon, and it's almost like the call to prayer in Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just like, okay, so, and it went on quite a few times. I remember morning, we just like, Jesus, morning now, and they start going on about something. At first, we didn't pay attention to that. We just tuned it right out. And so morning, I think noon, and then afternoon, I think evening, I think it's after 6 or 7 it stopped. But it went on forever. Basically, it tried to brainwash us and try to tell us how wonderful communism is,
Mm-hmm.
and we come to liberate you.
Yeah.
The same term that we hear in the Ukraine
Right,
right now.
right.
And we didn't know, well, we didn't need you to liberate us.
Mm-hmm.
We're just fine. And then how wonderful, you know, the new world will be and
Mm-hmm.
all that. We said, yep, remain to be seen. And so it went on that. And then later on, it began to talk about policies, a little bit like how they're going to treat the former South Vietnamese work for the government
Mm-hmm.
or soldier or whoever. So you could begin to hear policies a little bit. And after that, we began to hear, you know, how they're going to distribute food and cooking kerosene, because over there we cook a lot of kerosene, and the old kerosene, I remember, you know, the way, I think in America now they collect kerosene that you pump with a pump like that. As a kid, I said, wow, what is that thing? And then of course how to get food and how much per household, and then a lot more, I guess, visiting from the officials.
Mm-hmm.
We never seen these people before, but evidently we assume they came from the north.
Mm-hmm.
These are communist officials, and so they began to establish their government.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, what did they do with your father?
So I remember after all that brainwashing and whatnot, so they do the communists try to prepare for the next step. And one of the amazing things that I remember, how they could collect or gather all these their enemies, South Vietnamese, and certainly any, you know, one with information about, you know, American soldier, all that. They said that, you know, we'll gather you to go on almost like a sabbatical vacation for about a week, I remember. And so my dad partly, you know, have positive thought, have hopeful thoughts that, you know, I remember he packed a duffel bag, didn't have much, some clothes, that's about it. He didn't pack much food. And he said, you know, I'm gonna go and, you know, to this camp. I did not know the name of the camp. They just say go to the camp and report myself and follow some instructions, and I will be back in a week. And I said, okay, Dad. I was 5 years old, barely went through. I attended, you know, either kindergarten or first grade, and I remember saying goodbye to him, shook his hand, and then he left. And then turning around, take a deep breath, and then with my mom and wonder what might happen next. And then the week, I remember counting the day. I said, okay, Dad left this day, you know, he's gonna be, a couple more days, he's gonna be home, all that. Well, guess what? That day came and gone. The week came and gone. Never heard from him. And so I remember my mom, who's always stay at home, took care of the kids, traditional value in that way, began to panic and try to figure out what happened to her husband, what happened to my dad. And so thankfully my uncles, who have some other connection, are able, because like any society, the men, you know, go out and deal with the world more than the women. And so after some times, I remember they did not have any luck finding where my dad was. And they never told these men where they went. I think they had some sort of busing and then took them to God knows where. And so trying to figure out and checking where my dad was, I remember as a kid, it was nerve-wracking because I did not know if my dad was alive or dead. And I think it took quite some time, I would say a month before my uncles are able to tell my mom they located somebody by the name of Ray Vu. And so we was elated, but we didn't know his condition. Was he tortured? Was he got shot? Who knows? And so I remember after a year or so, we able to pinpoint that he did not get moved, and he stayed in that camp. And so my mom and I start packing things to, food, like, it's a way to show hospitality and warm. So pack food, pack some food and that to travel. And we never travel outside Saigon, just like a lot of people in Grand Rapids never move outside Grand Rapids. So we had to take buses, and we had to take a lot of, connecting buses to get to where we were. And we went there. I remember the first time I went with my mom, we went there and said, he's not there. I said, holy smoke. So we had to went all the way back, start from square one, and try to figure out where my dad was. And one of the amazing things I've learned through that process and other how to deal with the communists too is money talk. So thank God my dad, my family was able to have some money. So we were able to pay the government officials, and there's all kinds of level to find out information about my dad. And so we were able to get a little more accurate information where my dad was. So I remember going with my mom again. I said, oh God, don't tell me that, we will be locked out again. And the only reason I had to go with my mom, partly to get some moral support, give us some moral support, because in the meantime, my two sisters, younger one, who's going to take care of them? And then, of course, we did not where we supposed to go either. So it's just like trying to find the needle in the haystack. And so I remember being able to see him the first time, thank God this time. And I remember we had to wait. I remember coming to this camp here, and there was like a fence around, and there was a tower, the guard, the tower, the watchtower. And of course, soldiers up there. And I remember checking. I remember my mom came and talked with them, that she wanted to see her husband. And they were just giving her a hard time. Your husband's not here, blah, blah. I said, oh, God, don't tell me. And so for some reason, in the meantime, I started praying. I said, God, help me and whatever miracles that we suppose you have. And so finally, I said, yep, there's somebody by the name of Ray Vu. And my mom came back to me, standing further away. I said, yep, Dad. They said, oh, thank God. And so it took them a while to prepare him to take him out, for that. And we knew that I knew that my family already paid the whoever in charge of the camp money to be able to have that. Even with that, we knew that they still gave us a hard time. And of course, I think my mom gave him some money too, God knows. But I remember my dad finally came out, and I remember that meeting room. It's like everything in Vietnam, or most of the things in Vietnam, all the camp make out bamboo, just like what you see, how they kept, some of the, movies that we have. And so I remember there was a little table made of bamboo, or maybe small, and then there was benches made out of bamboos around, just like where you wait for the bus, and we waited in there, and my mom get the stuff put there so that I can give it to him. And the first time I saw him, and he looked a lot thinner. Certainly haircut different, and he had to dress different too. Like it's not like the prison uniform here, but it looked close to that. Though it's like a peasant in that way.
Yeah.
Certain outfit, and then we just like, is that Dad? And then I watched how the greeting from my mom with my dad the first time, and as a kid I should be emotional, but I remember being the head of the household now, so I held back the tears, but I can see how emotional it was for my mom to meet my dad again. And in the meantime, I know there's official with guns, the guard standing watch. So I remember my dad and had to tell my mom, be careful what you say, something like that. I can read, the language and all that. And so I remember the conversation was very superficial at first, and then she began to feed in some information, like, for example, where to pay to be able to get here, and then of course update. I guess couple talk to each other in code language, how the family was, and also my dad in the meantime also communicate some code language to my mom, what he needed, to survive. And I guess I can see. I try to compare the moment that my dad said, "Yep, one more week, I'll be back," and how hopeful, naive he was about the communist system and how wonderful Uncle Ho is and all that stuff. And then this time, I can see on his face how reality sunk in, and he finally realized that this is it. This is a real deal. This is who these people are, the communists, obviously. And of course, I was. It seemed. That moment. Our meeting, and that little time we had seemed to last really long. But before long, we realized that they said time's up, and that's it. And so I remember my mom was able to give him some of that stuff. Now, we didn't know, of course he could not take all that. They're gonna check, namely the camp guards and all that, and try to screen out what they will let him have and what they will have.
Yes.
And that whole system of like prison in that way. And I began in my head, I remember I mentioned that they call it a camp. And I think now, I think with the world, and I think later on in terms of the communication with the world and to the family, that re-education camp.
Yes.
And I remember in my head, just like I said, okay, I don't know what they re-educate. Is that a school they learn language or skills or what? Who knows? And I remember just that whole setting alone giving me the feeling that it's more a prison. There's no camp here. This is not when you go in for a summer camp.
Right.
As a kid, I began to absorb that. So that was a meeting that I remember clearly. And then all of a sudden, so we went home thinking, yeah, Dad will be there for God knows how long, but he will be there. Well, guess what? Wrong. If there's nothing that I've learned from the communists, that expected unexpected, just like the cartoon, and next thing I learned from the family was that he got moved again. In the meantime, I had to do the things I have to do as one in charge of the family, the man in the house. Mom had to take up some work outside. She knew how to sew like a lot of women, so she started doing sewing to make ends meet. We have some saving, but we didn't want to exhaust that.
Right.
And then me, I had to carry on with my education. I cannot stay home and do that. I guess partly because of my family education is so important. So I could just simply ignore it and stay home and work or do whatever to help the home. But I want to study well for the future. And then, of course, at the same time, I had to carry on the daily duties such as go shopping in the market, for food, deal with lining up to get the ration from the communists, getting water from the well, basically all the household thing. When it rains, we need to set out buckets so that we can get the rain from it. And then taking care to my two younger sisters, the youngest one, so we only 3 years apart. So I remember having to, we're talking about the sort of baby formula here. I've been there, I've seen it, because I fed my sisters. And we didn't have disposable diaper. I changed my sister's diapers. And cooking and do all that, learning how to cook. It was, I remember the first time I cooked rice, and I cooked 3-layer rice. So the bottom one was burned. The second part was not quite done. The top one obviously is still not done.
Oh.
And I brought in and to my folks, I said, "Is this rice?" They said, "Nope, it's not rice." So they make me eat all that. So that's one way of helping me improve my cooking. But it got better. So I did not know how I could handle all that, but I remember in my mind, I said, I need to do this for Dad. I need to do this for my family. I need to do this. I guess in my head, you probably wonder if I have any vengeful thoughts because toward the communists, because they're the one that make my family suffer. They're the one that destroy the country. They're the one that right now in control and run, make our life miserable. For one reason or another, I remember as a kid, I never dwell on the thoughts of the vengeful thoughts against them, or try to sabotage them, or I don't know, where the bomb and start blowing them up. So it's just a sort of carry on the day-to-day activities. And then the next thing we know that, hey, we had to go and take care of Dad in the camp. And I could not leave I think there were only one time I let my mom go alone because I either have a test or something at school important. But I always went with her. I remember my dad was moved to many other camps. And one of those camps was along the Cambodia, Laos area, I think the mountain yard, I think the American.
So you're in the highlands area.
Exactly. So I remember going there one time. I know there's other places. And I saw the Vietnamese, I saw these folks. The first time I said, are they Vietnamese, Mom? Because they look like Vietnamese, but they dress and they a little bit different. So they dress in sarong like the Samoan, and the women, sometimes they walk bare.
Topless.
Yep. And then of course they love to wear a lot more things, like their ear, they pierce, and this humongous earring. I said, what the heck is that? And the nose rings. So it looked a bit different, and I remember when we fill out some information, they asked, what's your race? And I belong to the most prominent race. They call it King, K-I-N-H. And then those, and I found later on that those Mountain Yar was one of 70 or 80 ethnic groups in Vietnam. And so that was quite an eye-opening experience for me. And of course, we had to deal with the camp guards and all that. So each camp run differently. And I remember, I think they did not allow us to give him anything. And we had to take that whole thing back home because, And we said, geez, I mean, we had to drag all the food and everything.
Mhm.
It was so heavy, and we could not. And of course, you know, we were worrying what my dad gonna be like.
Mhm.
And throughout the whole experience, you know, I began to wonder, you know, what uh, I'm, what my dad's life would be like the day to day over there.
Mhm.
And I think later on, you know, after he got released and all that, I learned more about what he had to do in those camps and how lucky he was if they found out that he worked for I think for intelligence and national security. And according to my dad, they hated those folks the most.
Right. Now, what did they think he was?
You know, that's one of the things I think I remember, like most government who lost the war, all that. I remember my dad said they tried to burn all the papers.
Right.
They tried to destroy all the documents. However, here's the thing that they tried to do. They able to put the pieces together, whatever the information they had left either from the burned documents or somebody forgot to burn certain things to, they also gather, I guess they recorded certain things about certain officials and whoever. So they do have something to go by from their own book, from their own records. And then they also evidently also use that whole thing, neighbor against neighbor.
Yeah, yeah.
If there's one thing I've learned about the communists, you cannot trust anyone, even your own family, because they can turn you right in.
Mhm.
Whatever reason, I don't know. I think they play one against the other. So I remember my dad said that he's afraid to see some of his friends or neighbors or whoever, because like I think they collect all information when you talk to each other or when whoever, and they try to extract and compare to see if you are truthful. And I remember that was one of the things that he tried to hide his identity. And you know, I knew that he didn't. My dad never told me how high rank he was, but he said that if they knew that he belonged to that group up there in that whole national security apparatus, he'll be dead. And the way, I guess the way they told me, my dad and other relatives who got released after that, after the concentration camp or re-education camp, is that they will send the one that they knew right away, the biggest official to North Vietnam, where John McCain and those are high-ranking officials, or the one that they hated. And then there's still another one that they said that if they really hated you and all that, they will send you to Siberia. You won't come back. Yep. And we didn't know Siberia. Where the heck? I know it's somewhere in Russia, but no idea why they sent that, because most Vietnamese could not speak Russian anyway, so I have no idea. And then of course other ones, I guess, they just sent around Vietnam, those camps, and those camps also a way for them to screen out who's who. And there's some camps that even in the South Vietnam can be notorious, like the one that we talked about in World War II, Auschwitz. I mean that type. And then I began to learn a little bit about the camp, the life of the camp, through my dad and through other, relatives. But like most American GIs and people of that war, they didn't talk much. But I do know that I try to understand how the life in the camp would be. And my dad sort of, I think at one of those visits, and briefly, but I think later he talked a little bit, that I put pieces together, is that they would have them, wake up, and do certain chores, and then set them out either to demine or move some ammo from you know, from bunkers and whatnot. So do a lot of dangerous stuff. And so natural question would be, you know, didn't anyone get killed? My dad said, yeah. So explosive when you work with it. So I guess one of the ways that I've learned through the camp is that they themselves, not communists, wanted to kill these people without using any bullets. And that, because if it shoot these people just like the Khmer Rouge or any other government, it's so easy and the world will condemn them. So they had the facade, the image to project.
Yeah.
And that's why the whole thing about re-education camp, all that just simply the propaganda.
Okay. Well, did they do, one thing that communists are famous for is sort of self-criticism sessions. Did they make them then sit around and confess all of their crimes?
Yep. So I remember my dad mentioned, yeah, so my dad had to go to sit with them and learn, just like we do the same thing in school, but I might mention that later, but they try to sort of brainwash sessions, one goal. The second is that they try to, it's like interrogation, but in a different way. So they try to compare notes, try to extract much information about these guys, who these guys really are, and which one is more the high value targets. And you know, and they try to see which one will have a chance of collaborate with them. So I remember my dad said that, yep, he hated that the most. I think there was individual interrogations, you know, to get information from each one, and then there's sessions with groups. My dad didn't tell how many in the group, but that's one he also hated too. And I think there was one, I remember he told me that he remembered this guy, and they're not friend, but they work within that department, the national security. And he said, oh God, he said that, man, he gonna point me right out and I'm gonna be toasted. And for one reason or another, and it's almost like, it reminds me of Judas, Peter himself, and somebody, a servant girl met Peter in the garden. Hey, you're the disciple of Jesus, I know you. And I remember my dad was confronted with that by this guy who worked in his department. And he tried to point out, you know, how high value my dad was, and dad did everything he could to deflect it. And I guess lie, I guess that's one word to survive, but I'm sure it was hard for my dad because raising in a Catholic, devout family, dad never lied, but he had to. And I remember he tried to say, nope, I didn't do that. I'm just simply the guy who took order and they tell me to do this. And I guess I don't know how, must be a miracle that the communists bought my dad's version. I don't know if they bought it completely, but he was able. I remember he was in the hot seat, and I guess that was, for me, that was one of the reasons why they moved these guys around to see which one will meet, because they did, you know, and then they would just, you know, point out the other guys. So that was one. Yep, that was one of those. So they had all those sessions, and then throughout the days, and meantime, they also make these guys work. And so I said, well, shouldn't they feed you so that way we don't have to go? But I guess my dad likes a few that try to plan ahead. So my dad was able to get a little piece of land inside the camp to tend a garden. I said, you tended a garden in the prison? And he grew, and that's why later on when he came home, he loved to grow and work in the garden. I guess partly for therapeutic, but he grew certain things, and guess what? He able to use that to trade for certain things. And then, but that was not enough because we had to help him survive in the prison. So like in any prison or concentration or re-education camp, there's a certain culture, and so I guess cigarette is one of those. It's not just here, but I remember Dad over there. He smoked when he was in the service, but when he was in the re-education camp, he did not smoke, but he still asked for a cigarette. I just like, why did he ask for a cigarette? What's that anything to do with anything? And I remember my mom would have to pack. That was the first thing I remember pack to bring to re-education camp, so that he can give it to the officials and do all that. Obviously, money would be the best thing, and then food would be the next one, and all that, just to get favor and survive, in the prison.
Okay. Now, in most of the camps, were you normally able to bring him food, and it was just the one time when you couldn't give him food, or?
Yeah, like I mentioned, each camp is different. And I remember we got turned away from one of those camps. We had to take all the food back. And the food, one thing I've learned through that whole process had to be, had to go through the drying process. And that's why when I watch some of the shows now in Alaska, they try to smoke, venisons and fish and all that. That's the type of food that we can give to them to last longer and to be able to, because they don't have refrigerator and other one will be spoiled. And there's, I remember there's certain type, I think we had the Vietnamese have, we dry around the Lunar New Year. You go visit any home, you have, they call it almost, they have, people can enjoy this type of dry food. Like coconut, they would dry that and they would go through the process and get a sugar. I can't remember how they call that. And then carrots, all kinds of fruit that you can dry. And so that one of the favorite one that for those guys. So sugar is one of those commodities that also not only hot or very valuable in the camp, but also in the real life.
Right.
I have no idea why, because like, as you and I know now, is, if you eat a lot of sugar, you got diabetes. So for me as a kid, just like, okay, why we need sugar for? But that was one of the commodities I know that valuable inside the camp and also outside. Salt is another one too. I guess, I guess they like to use salt.
Well, you need it for things, but yeah. Now, while all of this is going on, you're still going to school, you're carrying on. Now, did you face any kind of discrimination because your father was in a camp, or you were known to be, or because you were Catholic for that matter?
Oh yeah. Well, I think, obviously the communists play, I guess, all kinds of propaganda. I think they gave the impressions that they favor the Buddhists, to get the big group of Vietnamese to support them. And of course, that also was the downfall of Diem, because he tried to fight the two Buddhists, and then, he was Catholic and all that. But the communists tried to play the Buddhists against the Catholic. So, but then later on, the Buddhists realized that these are atheists. They don't care if you Catholic or Buddhist. So they finally realized that. But yeah, life was difficult, I guess, under communists, not only from the standpoint of getting, brainwashed every day with that. Can you imagine listening to all that all day to your neighbor? I mean, right now, if you, in the summer, you run into that a lot, that, people who crank up the music that you didn't want to listen to, and they just go by and say, geez, please. So just from that standpoint, I remember coming to America and said, wow, we don't have to deal with that crap anymore. And then the other thing was the basic necessity, I guess, ration. I think, I don't know if you watched the movie, by Robin Williams, Moscow and the Hudson, something like that. And then he himself came to America from Russia. and he was sponsored by an African American family sent to a store, and here he was looking at the store. They asked him to pick up some coffee. He came to the store and he saw all kinds, and they, so much coffee from the different brand, different price, all kinds. He was so overwhelmed, he passed out. Had to take him to emergency. And so the family got a call to go to emergency room to pick up this guy who was supposed to pick up. My point is that in this country here, we have so much. And I remember when I first came here, I was overwhelmed. Over there, if you go and buy bread, there's only one kind of bread. They don't even have price. I remember, so we had to, they distribute bread, they name it the local government, kerosene, meat, and a few other knick-knack items. The rest of it, we have to go and buy at the black market or from the people, pay more. Now, when the communists give, not give, and we had to pay for it, we only allow per family. So like my family, I only have mom and two sisters and me, so there's only 4 people. Oh, my grandparents, that's another. So each household, they will divide how much you can get. And so I had to, and then they give out only, not give out, we have to come certain time. If you didn't come certain time, and that could be during the time I had to go to school, I had to stop school to go to get that stuff. If not, you are locked out. So I had to deal with that. I had to keep that in mind, and they either tell us on the speakers, or we had to pass by their local store to keep that. So that was one of my priorities. And then, of course, had to help my 2 sisters, feed them, bathe them, all that stuff. And then I had to try to go to school too, and church. And in the meantime, I also I want to get a good education, be top in the class. I still in that naive thinking that, you know what, they're not gonna, the fact that I belong to that I have a dad who worked for the former regime will not affect me. I was wrong. So I was still like my dad. I began to mature and grow into realize who the communists really are. And so during that time, I still tried to pursue best grade and all that. I remember I had to take extra lessons. We had to pay for touring our own pocket so that we can be ahead in the class. And so trying to balance all that, it must be a miracle, but I thank God how God worked through that. And at the same time, helping my mom to take care of my dad. And I know mom had to work sewing, and I also took on the other project to make ends meet for my family. All the backsplash that you see, the tile that you have here, different patterns. I did all that as a kid, setting up. So for me, it was an art, the mosaic pattern, and I guess for me, when I worked through that, besides making some money, I had some time to think and reflect. So that helps a lot. But yeah, so the communists certainly biased against that, against the children of family that with that they call it you're on the blacklist.
Right.
And I only knew that until I get to college or high school, because that's when the rubber meets the road. That's when you can become, either go to college and become, doctor, professors, or whatever.
Government official.
Yep, exactly. That's another possibility as well. And the funny thing is that we did have, later on we have some of the family from the north who stayed there with the communists, never migrated, where my mom and dad and my grandparents migrated, some stayed up there. And when they came with the communists, you know, we were so surprised. We loved them because of the family, but then we saw them and how they was different in the thinking. I think you see the same thing now in Ukraine and Russia. And we just like, gee, you guys really, you know, was brainwashed like that. And we also, you know, did not trust them because for them it's a wonderful system. It's like heaven on earth. And we said, yeah, really, look at this.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, did you also do sewing for your mother? Was that?
Yep. So my mom did the peace work. So I think one of the ways, I know she had to go formally to work, but she able to either negotiate with them or sometimes had to be able to get the work home so she can either take care of some of the things at home or take care of my two sister. So peace work, you know, that was the concept. I thought you know, when I first came here, they talk about peace work. Yeah, I've been there, done that. So so everything from the vest here to the shirt that people wear, I've done all that. So I remember helping assemble the whole shirt together for my mom. So sometimes they would have my mom do the front of the shirt or the back of the shirt, sometimes sleeve, sometimes collar, all that. So I knew the art of sewing through my mom. And as a child, I remember I tried to push my mom to do more. So I was a slave driver in that way because I said, you know, at the pace that my mom do, you know, I remember we ran out, worked so fast, and my mom said, slow down. I said, no. And I was driven, you know, to get my family ahead. But the whole thing that I mentioned earlier about being on the blacklist, that was the last straw for me to make a decision to leave Vietnam.
Okay. Now, another thing you mentioned was going to church. Now, of course, the regime did not like the Catholic Church or anybody's church very much. How did that work? Could you actually go to a physical church and meet, or did you have to meet in people's homes?
No, I think they allow like electricities and everything else just intermittent. They do what, there's no rule. So officially, they would not. And then they would do maybe for controlling the population so they won't revolt. Or maybe the world won't look, won't see that they persecute the religion. But they are, they were. They basically, like I remember, I mean, any gathering more than 3 people, and I didn't know why 3 people, need permission from the government. So the local government and there's other officers need to ask. So I remember like Christmas, I mean, that's one of the big things for the Christian, the Catholic, you know, and we love, as a teenager, as a kid, we love to go to midnight mass, so we can hang out late at night. And the communists only allow prove that before we could, the priest or the clergy could even do that. And for me, that was shocking. So I began to understand what these guys are about. So they don't allow that. We cannot practice, go wherever we want either. I mean, if movement was controlled, so we could not go from Kentwood to Grand Rapids without permission. And then I remember the other thing that I remember was that they would come in and check attendance. I said, attendance? You had to check attendance? And so in the middle of the night, they knock on the door. I mean, there were many times, but one time I remember clearly. And Dad was not at home. He was in the concentration camp. And so Mom, they lie us all up. And I thought, great. So what they try to do now? And thank God, you know, we were all there. Now, if my mom, for some reason that did not make it back from visiting my dad because transportation, something might break down, I said, guess what? They would cross her out and say that you don't belong to this household. You lose, not only that, you lose citizenship. I said, how can you lose citizenship? So who are we? I mean, are we aliens or what?
Yeah.
I remember asking as a kid. And then here's another policy that the communists try to do is that they try to move their people into your home, into the South Vietnam, the land. So they would calculate the square footage. So my family, have two storage home, and for them, they do the square footage. That is rich, and for 4 people, 3 little kids and mom, and so a lot of the family, that my friends, that guess what, they themselves lost the home, and they moved these their own people to come in first to stay with you. Of course, that another heck out. You don't know these people, and and then they begin to push you out. And so some of these families I know get moved to God-forsaken and Timbuktu, someplace in Vietnam. Here they have the home, got pushed out, and that's what, because if they come in, they take they take your home. Well, the world condemn them. But that's how they slowly push people out. So some of the South Vietnamese get moved to, they call that, what's the name of that? It's like that, the term re-education camp, but I think this whole new era they call that.
Closer to resettlement or something like that?
Yeah, but I think they have the name. They call it. It's like it's a beautiful name. It's like paradise on earth.
Yeah.
New settlement or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
But they brandish, in the names. It's like, wow, everybody of course there's nothing there. We call it Timbuktu. So that was another thing that they tried to do, and I think. The other thing too is that I've seen some of my friends have broken family because either dad was lost and mom, the family tried to struggle to work, maintain all that without support or saving, and so divorce, separation. So I think the broken the family was one of the things that I've seen as a cause of war, and it's sad to see. So I always felt blessed that my mom and dad stuck together, and we're able to continue. Besides the not allowing us to practice our faith, here's another thing too, is that the clergy that being approved by the church or the Vatican, because the Catholic, we take order from the Pope and the bishop, is that they also create their own church. So like in China, for example, they got the government church and they have the people church. So the government church, like for example, I have, if somebody completed the training in the seminary in the church, that person have to qualify certain requirement from the government. They have to approve that, all that. So that's why a lot of clergy or seminarian did not pass that, and they themselves, never became a priest or nuns or all that, because the official would, they don't approve that, and another thing that I found that, so I think we talk about the re-education camp for the former official, but they do the same thing for us in the, I guess, the family or the society. I remember as a student, I think back then, I think we had a conflict with China, I think around 1980.
Yeah, 79, 80, yeah.
Yep. So with China and the north border, and then the Khmer on the west.
Yeah.
And I remember talk about re-enlist and drafting. I mean, they drafted all. I mean, even usually 18 or that. I remember we got drafted all, or at least practice for war when I was in 10th grade, and I wrote in my book, Living High Purpose, some of my
Well, it
friends.
wasn't even 10th grade. You would have been about 10 years old.
Yeah.
So for us, 5th grade or something like
Yeah.
that. But you're still a school kid.
Yep. So we had to learn to hold the weapon. I mean, they taught us all about the weapon. Some of my, I think even the guy is hard to hold that on one hand because we're just kids.
Yeah.
And I remember some of the girls in my class, they themselves struggled to hold with one hand, and we didn't know, how imminent the war was. So that whole thing. So I think the time was very chaotic and uncertain. But that was only part of it. Going to school is not just we try to learn the most as we could, but we have a government class that it's not about the system so much, but they try to brainwash us, just like our parents who in the reeducation camp, and how wonderful the communist system is. And they said, we are just there, but Russia is right at the socialist. So if we get to the socialist, that's perfect. I said, well, what after socialist? And so I remember they compared socialist to capitalist system. They said, with the capitalist system, now we see the market go up and down. We didn't know anything about the stock.
Yeah.
So they tried to tell, they said that, the capitalist system, there's inequality, all that stuff, and that the rich get richer and all that. And then they said the market go up and down. You don't want that. You want the government take care of everything for you and all that. Well, the government never took care of everything. They do take things from you, but as far as taking care of things, I mean, if that's the case, well, we are in heaven. But I remember the communists tried to get everything for them and build up the economy. And Vietnam tried to export some things. I think Vietnam has a lot of fruit, pineapples, oranges, you name it, even banana and all those. I remember we had, so not only the clergy had to being qualified by the government before they can be ordained and all that. Us here, we also have, they call that academic points. And you had to, they grade you just like regular class here. But you also have, they call that conduct points. And conduct means that they tell you something, you better do it.
Right.
If you do bad conduct. And we were forced, I don't know if maybe, I don't know the word volunteer, but we had to take time out our school hour to go to a factory. Not kidding. The first time we said, okay, I do work outside that we were taken to a factory and on the assembly line, and we have to work for free. Maybe they give us, I don't know, can't remember if they give us anything to eat, but we have to work here's a pineapple. So certain student will cut the peel, the pineapple. Certain one will, put in the can, all that. So I remember we worked with for free on fruit, and then seafood. I remember fish and squid and all that. And of course, for us kids, we just hated that stuff. So that part of the whole thing, and of course we got paid nothing. And so I think for me, the whole system itself, we didn't buy into how wonderful the communist system was. And I think the thing that helped us, for me at least, survive during that was my faith, my family, certainly friendship, and my desire to work harder and to be better, to keep my hope alive.
Great.
Yeah.
Now, how long was your father in the camps?
I remember the last time last time I saw him was, and I was 5. I was kindergarten, first grade, and time must be must be flying, because during that whole time, certainly my thought was with him, but I was so busy doing everything around. And next thing I know, I was, close to senior year. And that was when, all of a sudden, I remember that day when my dad showed up back, and out of the blue, we never got any notice that he'd be coming home or whatever. And we just like, Dad is here. And I remember my mom was not home. She was working outside, and I was at home after school or something like that. I saw him, with smaller bag and showed up. I just like, it's like somebody come back from the dead. And I couldn't, I was speechless. But I remember that moment. And, he himself certainly grew a little wiser in terms of knowing the communist system. And still, I think most of us try to just live a normal life. And so my dad came home thinking and hoping that they will leave him alone, or at least let him assimilate into society and continue to live out the remaining of his years. No, that didn't work that way. So I think when he came home, they continue to, I call that post re-education camp work. He had to check in to the certain offices. I remember so often, at least once a week, if not more. Fill out information, had to go to meetings. So that's when I came to this country. They said meeting. I said, oh gosh, I'm all meeting out. So Dad would have to go to those meetings, and even us, besides hearing on through the speakers, we had to go to meeting at least one, if not twice a week, per family. And usually they ask the adult to go. And I remember my mom was so busy, and and Dad already had to go to check in all that, and I had to go on behalf of the family. And of course, it's all same thing, brainwashings about how wonderful communism is, and usually irrelevant things to the life of a person, because we want to see, what we need to do, how we have to, where we're going to get more rights and things like that.
Now, did they allow him to work?
No. So that was another thing. So he himself, it's funny, they said that he's not even, he did not even have the Vietnamese citizenship. I said, how can that be? Well, he looks Vietnamese to me. But I try to, there's a lot of contradictions. And that's, if there's anything that I've learned from my years of living in a communist, a lot of contradiction. There's no consistent, we can never square something to make it fit. And so that was, they said, well, he's still working toward his citizenship. I said, well, what does he have to do to pass that as a kid? I remember they had to pass a test. Or how many years, like here in America, in order for you to get a green card, you have 5 years and things like that. There's no, we never knew how many years, what he had to do. So that's when he had to decide to sneak out from Vietnam, so he went first, and I myself, I left after that just because, like I shared earlier, that I was on the blacklist. And then of course Dad said, if you still feel that God's calling you, and he was already in America, you could, try to leave. And just like as a kid, I already been through enough with the war and when he was there. I hesitated to make that decision because family, like I said, faith and family was important to me. But this is a life-changing experience because when I leave, he was lucky to be alive. Some people did not make it. So I didn't know if I have a second life to risk. And then, yeah.
Now, how did he get out?
He himself had to sneak out by boat. So like a lot of Vietnamese, you either, Vietnam has a lot of river. So the goal would be you try to get you close to the river, and then you have to pay with other people in the boat. You basically pay for your seat in the boat, and you get out. You lucky. You pray that you get to the international water, and hopefully don't get captured and dragged back. So that's one way. Other people use the way by land, so they go either through Laos or Cambodia, or usually Thailand. They go through that.
Well, you have to get to Thailand.
Exactly.
And to get there, you got to go through Cambodia or
Yep,
Laos.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you have to go through all that. So those are the two main ways. Of course, after that, after my dad already snuck out, I think the Americans had the system they call the ODP, the order of departure.
Right.
Yeah. So orderly departure.
Yeah.
And so those folk, you had to go through the channel, wait for so many years and all that, and you fly to here.
Right. Yeah.
So he had to sneak out, and guess what? Like anything, you don't succeed the first time. So he got captured. Now you can only imagine, I could only imagine how he must have felt being put back in the camp like he used to be. And I remember going to see him, to visit him. So they treat those, I think those camps almost similar, but I remember I had to go and help him. And one time, but I guess those camps of the people who left Vietnam and then got captured, the security a little looser. And I remember one time my dad, so he had to try a few times before he can succeed. So that means we also, thank God, we had money to pay. But Dad one time got captured, and I remember I said, "Man, that's it. They're gonna kill him." So he was a good swimmer. He tried to swim across, the river, and then somehow they were able to. So they had a foot patrol and caught him. They beat the heck out of him. And I remember, and then he got diarrhea, and that was and they didn't have medicine. I remember I had to go bring my medicine for my dad to deal with that, and I thought, man, he was lucky last time, but he probably won't have the second life. But then again, God works in a mysterious way. He himself passed through that tough time, and then we had to pay, unlike the first time, we had to pay for him to get released. And so, make long story short, he tried one more time, and he succeeded. So we thought that, with that being gone, now they can leave me and my mom and two sisters alone. Wrong. Now, they knew that my dad is gone, and so they always assume. So whenever you have people in America or the Western country, they say that my dad worked for the CIA, like anything. And so now we on the list, all of us. And so me as the oldest, and now I'm a teenager and young adult, and so I would be on that list. So I had to make that tough decision, and I knew that I wouldn't have any future, in Vietnam, and I guess the vocation that I tried to go to answer the call from the Lord. I guess going through war, it helped you. If you make it through, it helped you to become compassionate and caring about other people around you who suffer. And so I have the heart for that. And so between the desire to serve God and serve others, to the fact that I wouldn't have any future in Vietnam, but at the same time I know that I would now have to leave my mom to fend for herself, my two sisters, and even my grandparents and all that, because like it or not, I was elected, even if I didn't know that, to lead that clan.
Yeah.
And so that was hard for me to leave as well. But I guess God gave me a little nudge. And then I also took the same route that my dad did. And like my dad, I never succeeded the first time. And I experienced, to a certain extent, what we went through, because I got captured arrested a couple times and was in there. But I looked young for my age, and they thought that, I was in there for a few weeks too. So they released me without my family paying, for me to be released. And of course, it was a totally different culture inside the prison. And of course, I was prepared for it, partly because of everything I did for my dad.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so that came here first, and then I succeeded to sneak out, and that trip was something else.
What year did you get out?
I left when I was, although I began in '85, I didn't succeed until the end of '87 or something like. So it took a couple of years.
All right. And so did you get caught twice or 3 times?
Quite a few times.
Okay.
Yep. So I remember I think living in Saigon is wonderful in the sense that you have all the convenience. Your life, you don't have to deal with the river and the creeks and all that, but you're far away from the creeks. And so you have, like my dad, I had to travel to there. Now, you don't know who those people are. And of course, I didn't know that my mom had to pay the money for that either. And so my family had to take care of all that. And of course, you get there, and things never pan out the way you hope for. So like corruption, sometimes people want money, so they turn you in to the government. And of course, I remember the last one that I got captured before I succeeded. And I wrote in my book, Living for High Purpose, is that I remember I had to stay. So the plan was discover. So it was spoiled, and so we all had to disperse. And some of us went right away to catch the bus to get back to Saigon. Those people get captured fast because they learned that there's a group of people that just try to sneak out. So they set up checkpoint. I myself, like I said, I thank God for those years' experience. So I linger. So I hung out in the field, and of course try to spot different houses, which one that really belongs to the communists, which one that you can come and ask for help. And I remember, even that night that we were spoiled, I remember, that shot from the tower. And the guards shot right at me. I just I can see the streak of fire, bullets
tracer,
coming up, and I had to duck quickly. Didn't know how to swim. I thought I'm gonna die either from bullet or that. Somehow, that whole experience of rising from the dead like Easter, I came up and I said, I guess God still want me to live. Paddle did some dog paddle to the side, and that's when I spent the night. And they, because they, like I said, they had a checkpoint, and the government began to search for these people to round up. And I remember they talked, and I was hiding, under, some grass and whatnot. And boy, I can see their AK-47, their weapons, all that. They tried to poke around, and I made it through that search. And then the next day, I had to search for the family that can help, because I need to find direction, maybe ask for some money, because we didn't pack a lot. If we do, they catch us, here's all the evidence. So I remember scoured through this, and one of the family I came to some other one had flag and all that. We know that belonged to the communists. I came to this to this family here. The older couples came out, and I already saw in their house some Catholic statues. I said, oh, thank God. And so they helped me give me enough food and then little money, and then show me how to catch the bus back back home. And so for me, I made it back. So when my family saw my dad, that was one miracle. When they saw me and they knew that this trip was spoiled, they said, God did a second miracle. And they thought that maybe I should give up because they didn't want to lose me.
Yeah.
But I was determined, and I sneaked out the last time, and that's when I went and succeeded. And that trip, I floated at sea. A lot of movies have been made just from that scene alone. So I went out. We pray. So we in a little boat, dinky boat, with about close to 100 people, and we finally made it through all the checkpoints and with all that, and we make it to international water and out there at sea, with the sea water. It's so hot that it gets you right to your skin and you become dehydrated quickly. And I remember we prayed for rain. Wow, we did have rain. And that night we had wave about 20-some foot high. And I said, I think I cannot make it. And that movie that we seen here, The Perfect Storm, I watched that with a lot of memories of my own. And those guys, the way they battle that, and that's the same thing I went through. And the only difference was that those guys never made it back. I did. So I thank God because I thought, that was it. And we pray and did all that.
Okay. To back up a little bit, when you mentioned you're going down the river, you have to go past checkpoints.
Yep.
Were the people hiding on the boat?
Yeah. So that was the trip itself. We had to. It's funny how they try to plan out. So we had to take like 2 or 3 buses from Saigon to some river, and they call that taxi. That's where the little boat to the big boat. And even with that, it's talk about art, because we have to avoid the government, because either they wear the uniform you can identify, or they have agents. And so I remember we had to lose the tail. It's fun. I love like 007. It's funny, when I was in Vietnam, that movie was there, 007, but the agent was Russian. Now, when I made it, I remember, I don't know how many times I went to see that movie. And then we made it, or when I made it, I will back up and answer your questions about going through the checkpoint. But when I made it to Singapore, and I remember watching 007 in Singapore, I said, man, this is the same movie, but this guy here is American. I mean, he's a British.
Yeah.
So so we have to, so I love spy movies and whatnot. So we had to lose, so they taught us how to pay attention to certain people. So we made it through the bus trips, and then go to that. So, and the timing had to be right. I remember we had to leave like 4 or 5 in Saigon and take some of the last buses that go from Saigon back to those villages. Because you go through earlier, had to wait, and that means that, at a certain point, that means you expose and all that stuff. So I remember coming to that point to catch the taxi, the boat. It was just about dusk. I remember it dark enough we couldn't see in front of, like between me and you. And so we, there's a few of us first, and then they got so many groups, and we finally get together in one boat, and then they got other small boat like that, and then begin to funnel to the big boat. So that's how we can get like close to 100 people. And going through that, it's just like, I remember in the dark, I said, there's no way we can make it out here, because we didn't know. I couldn't see. And so we basically they just tell us to hide, all that, and either put, I remember they put fish on top of us, and it stinks like heck. I just like, oh God. So fish first and all that stuff, and then we get to the big boat, and I think they carried something, I can't remember now, but it stunk. And we hid underneath that, and for me, I thought that they would have to check every single boat. They, namely the communists, and they have those checkpoints. I remember we had to go through at least 3 checkpoints, and I can see through the moonlight, so that it was, and we had to time it on the trip too. I share in my book that the communists are not stupid, so they over in Asia or around Indochina, they have a typhoon. So the typhoon happened around October to January, around Christmas. That's why you hear some of the bad one that happened in Indonesia, Philippines, all that flood, all that happened around that time. Now the communists say that, hey, if you dare to go like that, by all means. So usually that's when the security is loose.
Okay.
So we had to time all that, and we also had to time the moon, all that, because with the moon is so bright, and they can see that you've done. So I remember I didn't know how much plan to go into this. So we went through that. I can see the bridge, all that certain bridge. I didn't know where that bridge was, but I remember we had to be silent. I remember the guy, the captain, had to tell us, quiet, guess what? We have some baby. And of course, baby cry whenever they cry. You cannot make the baby just shut up. And I remember the baby cry, and I thought, that's it. This is it. And must be a miracle. Somehow they did not check thoroughly and all that. We make it through. I remember breathing a sigh of relief. So we make through 2 or 3 checkpoints, and then we finally, got through the river and start heading out. Now, when we out there in the ocean, a few things that happened. First, I think back in the 80s, the communist pack, USSR, Czech, all that, those communists are still around there along with China. So those guys have the ship, so they could catch us and pull us right back. So that's one. Obviously, the Vietnamese communist boat patrol is still around. So that's second one. Of course, we had to deal with the weather, all those things. But we finally made it through that. I remember going through, and the guard, did yell out, what you have here, and I think the captain said, nothing, just merchandise, nobody here. And of course, any lies that I grew up in a religious family, and it's like, yeah, that guy is lying. So, but I said, must be okay with God, because we need it. So we got out through that, but I remember they had to do some maneuvering. I'm sure there must be some exchange of money too, because those guys needed money, and they certainly don't need to capture more people.
Yeah.
So I remember I did hear all that conversation from they poke around. I can hear the bayonet poking through the ship, and they tell them to flip certain things open. I guess the boat was sectioned, so the captain only opened the section that they want those guys to see, and so we made it through the checkpoint.
Okay.
Yep.
So you get through all that, you get through your storm, and then what happens?
Well, one of the things that we wanted was that we try to find any Westerns or non-communist boats.
Yeah.
Now, I learned in geometry, you have the flat surface, and that's the horizon, all that, beautiful horizon, sunset. Wow. It's funny how the Earth, even though you see that that ship over there, and by the time you get there, it's mile. And evidently the captain, the boat itself is not quite seaworthy either. So it's a dinky boat. And he said, well, he had some map, Well, he never been outside Vietnam before, so he didn't know where he's supposed to go. We didn't have good navigation system either. So I remember the storm. He said that it threw him off course. Whatever that might be, maybe he was heading south. Who knows? So we were just trying to maneuver around. And I remember the other thing besides trying to avoid the communist ship was pirates. Now, like you know, 007s and all that. I love those movies as a kid, as a boy. I also love pirates, you know, like Peter Pan and all that. Well, not until you're out there. And, you know, you talk to most Vietnamese, they ran to communists, into pirates. And it's horrible. First of all, we tired. We just ran away from a bad guy. Now we ran to another bad guy. So out there, you know, and these could be those boats, fishermen. And of course out there, you know, it's a jungle. Whoever had the biggest guns on the water. And so these folks rob, rape, and took a lot of hours. I mean, they strip us down to the underpants. And that is if they allow us to live. If they didn't, you know, they kill us or throw us overboard, what are we gonna do? So I remember our ship being, you know, run into a pirate ship so many times. And I didn't believe that until even the moment we got rescued by the South Korean tanker. I mean, the whole, you know, black flag with the
skull and crossbones.
I was just like, am I really seeing? I mean, I remember, as you know, in my mind, I said, really? And I couldn't believe it. With my own eye, obviously the captain could see that. So he avoided that because he got binocular. So he saw how far up. He said, yep, that's the pirate ship right there. And so when you try to run from one thing to the next, you know, you run into, you know, just like, you know, you try to run from the lion, you might run into, I don't know, you know, the
crocodile.
Crocodile, not just the same. So the same thing out like that. And so I remember we ran out of food, we ran out of, well, the water itself we did have from the rain, but didn't have anything to catch. So, so the pirates was horrified, say the least. And after I was rescued to the camp, taught you a lot of story like that. And of course, some of the ship did not make it either. If you get, because Pacific Ocean is full of islands, and some of the refugee people got drifted into that and can never be found. You know, there's so many islands. But I remember, if there's one of the things I think a lot of Vietnamese refugees forgive it now. But I remember they always held. They might have a little hate toward the communists, but I remember they really resented some of the people, those pirates. I mean, because they could be Filipinos, could be Indonesians. I mean, those are the ones around the corner, you know. And of course, you know, you hear a lot in Africa, you know, Somalia. I mean, pirates. A movie made about that, you know, Captain Philip, you know, and you know, maybe it's not their fault, but for the victims who had to run away from, you know, the communists and all the bad regime, and then having to deal with that was difficult.
Yeah. How many times did the pirates actually catch your ship?
Oh boy, you know, I think at least half a dozen at a time.
Wow.
Yeah. So we thought we were done. Just like, you know, how much more can they rob us? Because first, I mean, we didn't bring anything to begin with. But so I mean, from the watch, I don't know, jewelry, they took all those. Obviously, those go first, and then I think they scraped. Next one would be food and fuel. So talk about running out of fuel soon. So anything they could take. I think, thank God, they did not take our engine, because I mean, look, they could just strip the engine, let the boat float. So they take anything that, and certainly they treated the women and all that bad. So, yeah. So for us, we were lucky. I mean, even after 6 times.
Yeah. Did anyone on the boat die while you were there?
No, but we were close.
Mhm.
I know, obviously, the women and the young kids would be the one. I was a teenager, so I wouldn't say I'm in a good shape. I still better
Yeah,
off than
yeah,
them,
yeah.
because some of them look like they probably will see their maker soon.
Mhm.
So that's when the captain, I remember the captain mentioned about the whole idea of, because some of the Vietnamese refugee had to uh, do cannibalism.
Yeah.
And of course the movie about that Alive.
Yeah.
But I remember as a kid, I said, oh gosh, I said, I didn't know how much more my brain can absorb all that, with close to death, with the waves and then the seasick, and then, the boat itself, and that's why the summer when I drive and I smell the tar, it brought back memories that I had in the boat, because this is diesel engine, and it noisy, you say the least, and then the fuel there with the tar that they try to cover for the boat in the heat is toxic. I mean, it gives you a headache. So I remember they tried. The captain said, we ran out of food. The only other way you want to make it, you had to eat the dead. And I said, eat the dead. I didn't eat that chicken. I mean, bad food, let alone this. And so I remember trying to process all that. I said, I don't know if I could, but he said, that's your choice. And we have few people that was close to death, but never passed away. So we have a choice. We either throw that person, aboard, or we could, eat that person to survive.
Yeah.
And so that was a thought that until this day, I don't know, the word disgusting would come to my mind, but it's really, chasing my, my thought. It's really something that I would have to struggle with, to deal with.
Right. So how long do you think you were out there at sea before the Korean tanker found you?
Oh, we were floating there about a week and a half, I
Okay.
think. And I remember we couldn't remember the day, but I think roughly about over a week and a half. And we didn't know that ship would rescue us.
Yeah.
Just because we had some other ship that we thought would help us, and then they ran away. Because I guess I learned later that, if these ships pick us up out, let's just say humanity, kindness,
Yeah.
and they run to a country, let's just say any country, Philippines and Indonesia, wherever, and the government doesn't allow them to bring in, well, guess what? They get stuck with these people. And so, thank God, this ship here, I remember the captain said, we have this ship here, and maybe they will help us. And I guess one of the way that we realized that they would pick us up is that they do, I guess it's international side, they would circle around us for 3 times. And I remember, I said, man, that is a big tanker, and we had in dinky little boat. And even if they agree to pick us up, we probably get tipped over and we all die in the ocean. So I remember they did that, and the feeling of, I guess, resurrection. I think the combination of here we're being saved after everything we've been through at sea, being saved from the communist system that we had to deal with all those years. So I think the combination of all the feelings of, this is it. I think this is what it feels like to. I remember breathing the air. It feels like freedom, but I didn't know what freedom meant until I come and live here.
Yeah.
But that's so they finally. So this ship finally allow us, pick us up and allow us to come up.